Thank you for attending to today's webinar, Working with Men and Boys for Social Justice Assessment Tool. My name is Amanda Keddy and I'm from Deakin University. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We gratefully acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we meet and their custodianship of this country known as Australia. This project was conducted on Wurundjeri country and I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country. We pay respect and gratitude to elders, past and present, of the lands we live and work on, to their ancestors and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. To build resilient and inclusive societies, we must recognise our history. Sovereignty has never been ceded and the destruction and violence caused by colonisation are ongoing. We acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities' long-standing contribution to our collective learning and in building strong, safe and well communities. My colleagues and I, Michael Flood, Shelley Hewson-Munro, Maria Delaney and Anna Halifoff, are really excited to share with you today our new resource, Working with Men and Boys for Social Justice Assessment Tool. The schedule for today will involve a 30-minute presentation that covers the background of the tool. Then we'll show you a 10-minute video of the tool that demonstrates how to use it, followed by an opportunity for you to access the tool with time at the end for questions. And please feel free to ask questions as we go in the chat, and we'll try to respond to those at the end of the session. Over to you, Michael.
Look, thank you, Amanda. Michael Flood here from Queensland University of Technology. Look, I want to start with a brief comment on the context for this tool. So there is in Australia a growing field of work focused on engaging men and boys in positive personal and social change. Some of those programs are focused on engaging men and boys in preventing men's violence against women, some on men's health and well-being, some on young men's material circumstances, some on fathering, and so on. The organisations involved are diverse. There are small advocacy and service-focused groups running campaigns in local communities. There are large-scale national organisations and, of course, regional and global networks. And the wider context for this kind of growing field of work with men and boys is growing community and media attention to masculinity, to how boys and men are raised, to the harmful forms of masculinity that feed into suicide, into violence, and debates over notions like toxic masculinity and so on. And in Australia, what we've seen in the last decade or so is a surge or growth in the number of programs and initiatives designed to support healthy or positive masculinities. These programs are diverse in terms of their approaches, their understandings, and their strategies. And our sense, and a sense that we try to embody in this tool, the sense of the people on this panel, is that the most effective programs, the best programs, will be gender transformative. That is, they will be oriented towards changing unhealthy, inequitable, or unjust gender norms, gender roles, and gender inequalities. They will also be oriented to social justice. They'll be grounded in a fundamental attention to questions of social injustice. So the Working with Boys and Men for Social Justice Assessment Tool, or just the tool, if you like, is intended to assess existing work with men and boys. The tool articulates the key aspects of practice that are important in developing or assessing programs for boys and men that aim to support gender justice and social justice. And we've developed this tool through research, through team collaboration and critical reflection, and through consultation with practitioners in the field. Next slide, please. So who's it for? It's really intended in the first place for leaders, designers, and facilitators of programs for boys and men to evaluate the social and gender justice capacities of their program. In other words, people who are doing the work or designing, implementing, and assessing the work. And the tool is written as a self-evaluation measure in which leaders of programs for men and boys or others respond to a series of questions. And you'll see more about that in a moment. So we've designed this tool to be useful for organisations and advocates seeking to assess and improve their work with men and boys. For organisations and advocates having discussions with program leaders, with facilitators, with participants about the strengths of the program and how to improve it. And obviously for others too, for policymakers, for funders, for others seeking to assess the merits of work among men and boys. Back to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Michael. So the tool provides 56 items in 4 key areas, as you can see from the first table: aims and scope, scale and support, teaching and learning, and evaluation and improvement. The tool is an assessment measure which results in a score, as you can see from the second table. The score is intended to highlight areas or aspects of your programs that reflect strength and areas that could be improved. However, the intention here is not to conceptualize the process of using the tool or the end score as a blunt instrument. The tool would probably be used best as a conversation starter about aspects of programs that leaders and facilitators may not have thought about. It's intended to promote deep and ongoing reflection. It necessarily covers a range of complex concepts and recognises that working with men and boys for social justice is difficult work. We're also understanding the tool as a work in progress that could be refined in light of consultation with programs. The tool also provides access to a range of practice-oriented resources to support program improvement, and these are organised around the 4 key areas: aims and focus, scale and support, teaching and learning, and evaluation and improvement. So how did we develop the tool? The tool was developed as part of a research project supported by CRIS, which is the Centre for Resilient and Inclusive Societies, led by Deakin University. In the study, we conducted research with 20 community programs designed to support healthy and inclusive masculinities in Victoria.
I think we've lost...
Sorry,
Amanda, we just lost you for a moment. That's all good.
Oh, all good. Sorry. So the study's research questions were focused on examining how these programs understand masculinities, gender violence and inclusion in their work with men and boys, how these understandings were reflected in their programs, and how they aligned with the principles of social justice. There were 3 methods in the study. The first was a descriptive stock take of programs in Victoria, of the different types of programs for men and boys. The second was interviews with 20 program leaders, which sought to explore the aims and purpose of the programs, the curriculum, funding and accountability issues, the design of the programs, the participants, facilitation and program support for gender and social justice. And thirdly, we conducted 5 case studies of programs to further examine the issues that came out of the interviews. So we've published a few papers from the research that draw attention to the successes and difficulties that program leaders encounter in their work with men and boys. For example, relating to intersectionality and the difficulties of challenging gender injustice with men and boys experiencing high levels of oppression themselves, relating to, for example, poverty, homelessness, and racism. We have a paper in Gender and Education recently published that provides a case study description of the different types of programs we examined in the research, including a rights program, an activist program, and a sports program. In this paper, we analysed the gender transformative capacities of these programs. Our paper our paper on an Indigenous approach to addressing gender-based violence with boys and men, with Ben McVeigh and Jalen Thorpe, draws on Indigenous theorists such as Tyson Yunkaporta and Judy Atkinson, who provide really important insight into the significance of relationality and connections to all living things as key to creating a non-violent world, and how decolonisation and healing are central to this process. And we're really happy to share these papers with you. Just email me directly. So the team. The tool is informed by the research that I just outlined, but it's also informed by our wealth of research and practice experience, which we'll detail in a moment. It's been an absolute privilege working with this group. I think the tool is stronger given our different scholarly and practice areas. This has meant that the development of the tool has been rich, but it's sometimes difficult in terms of reconciling some of our different ideas and experiences. And of course, the shifting terrain more broadly in how we're thinking about this work, which is often politically contentious. And we wanted to explain some of these processes. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, so one obvious question is, why a checklist? And so, we wanted to improve the quality of the work engaging men and boys in change. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. But one strategy that we've seen in the violence prevention field, in the health promotion field and elsewhere is a checklist. So a structured list of elements of effective practice where you can assess your or other people's practice against that list. And so, we arrived at this idea of a checklist. And checklists have been used, as I've said, in violence prevention in other fields. So we decided that that would be a kind of useful contribution to the field. In terms of the evidence, there's a growing body of scholarship on the effectiveness of efforts to engage men and boys in change. I reviewed this recently in a report for UN Women, finding that there's growing evidence that well-designed interventions, that's a big caveat, but well-designed interventions can increase men's and boys' gender equitable attitudes and behaviours, can increase, for example, men's and boys' involvements in sexual and reproductive health, or in parenting and care work, or in avoiding intimate partner and sexual violence. But that evidence base also is limited. Most of the interventions and the evaluations of them are focused only on kind of micro level change at the levels of individuals and their relationships. The evidence itself is uneven, and few evaluations examine wider shifts in gender relations. Nevertheless, in developing the tool, we've drawn as far as we can on existing evidence regarding elements of effective practice. But there are some complexities here, and I'll briefly talk about three. First, about evidence. We certainly had conversations about what counts as evidence, what kinds of studies, what kinds of data count as evidence, and there are debates in the field about this. Second, approaches. We've explored different perspectives on how to address gender and other forms of injustice. In fact, we had some lengthy, sometimes difficult conversations over the extent to which the tool should focus only on gender transformative or feminist elements and how much it should explore other dimensions of social injustice. And third, as Amanda has mentioned, there are shifts in both the character of the work, the kind of work that's going on among men and boys around the world, and also there are shifts in the wider social, political, and cultural context for this work. Final question is, how can we use the tool in generative ways, in productive ways? And there's always a risk with things like this that they could be used in a superficial way or an instrumentalist way rather than as intended. And of course, what we want the tool to be used as is as a means for ongoing and deep reflection about aspects of our practice. Back to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Michael. So just building on Michael's comments, we debated how much we should foreground gender and masculinities in the tool. Originally, we were thinking of naming the tool Working with Boys and Men for Gender Transformation, and we had many conversations about whether we should include gender in the title. Obviously, gender is central to this work, but we came to the conclusion that it's too narrow a focus when considering the multiple intersecting forces beyond gender that shape boys and men's lives, including their use of violence. We want to transform more than gender. So gender is explicit in the tool in key items, but it is absent in other items. As we know, practices such as violence, while gendered, are not just about gender, they are tied to other aspects of identity, relationships, and structures. We also wanted to be mindful here of not reducing all of what boys and men do to various categories of masculinity, whether healthy, respectful, inclusive, green, Indigenous, colonial, hegemonic, dominant, and so on. Boys and men's thinking, knowing, and doing are not always about gender and masculinity, just as girls and women's thinking, knowing, and doing are not always about gender and femininity. We decided to call the tool the Working with Men and Boys for Social Justice tool rather than, say, Working for Men and Boys with Men and Boys for Gender Transformation or Social Change. The use of social justice is deliberate. It's a definitive focus and central to what we want to be working towards. In the tool, we conceptualize social justice as a process, as in procedural justice. For example, many of the items focus on connecting with boys and men in meaningful ways, creating safe and democratic spaces, listening to boys and men's stories, recognizing trauma and its impacts and providing external supports if necessary. But we also conceptualize social justice as an outcome that is about redressing gender and other forms of oppression. For example, there are items focused on critical learning for social justice through inviting boys and men to reflect on how their values, beliefs, and behaviours contribute to creating inequality and harm, and how they might take action for social change, as well as items focused on internal and external accountabilities. Conceptualising social justice along these lines, we think, is important because it embeds intersectionality into the tool through focusing on connecting with the complex diversity in boys' and men's lives, while also challenging the gender and social harms that men and boys experience and perpetuate. Lastly, I want to mention language concerns. We know that we have not necessarily got the language right in the tool. For example, we use terms such as patriarchy a few times, which is a very important term, but from my perspective needs unpacking in terms of its meaning within different contexts and for different groups. For example, Indigenous scholarship associates this term with colonisation and racism. We've also avoided terms like effective practice or best practice, and we had disagreements about what these actually mean in different contexts and for different groups and people. And we decided social justice is what we mean by effective practice in this tool. On the next few slides, we briefly share what we've brought to the tool in terms of our understanding and addressing issues of masculinity with boys and men, because we know that our positioning has informed what the tool looks like, and we'd like to share that with you now. So, as I mentioned before, I'm from Deakin University. I'm a professor of education. A key focus of my work, beginning about 25 years ago, has been examining how different theories of gender shape how we understand and address masculinities, particularly in schools. My work's been shaped by feminist theories and theories of masculinities, particularly Raewyn Connell's work. More recently, I've been examining the intensities of emotion and feeling in the ways boys and men configure what we're calling hegemonic masculinity with the use of affect theory, including the emotions and discomfort they experience when engaging in gender activisms. My research during this time has also sought to develop frameworks for teachers to educate for gender justice, with a specific focus on boys and young men, and to identify how educators and facilitators working in this space might better navigate the emotional intensities of this difficult work, including supporting facilitators to reflect on their own biases, intersectionality, and practice in their work with boys and men. And my work's also extended to considering how schools and teachers can educate for diversity and social justice, including research on respectful relationships in primary schools. And additionally, as I've already mentioned, my research has taken inspiration from Indigenous theories about relationality and connectedness to all living things as imperative in creating a non-violent world. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you. So look, in terms of my work, I think my work predates yours, Amanda. You said 25 years, mine's 30, I think. So, my first involvement in work to do with engaging men and boys was in violence prevention. And so I became involved in the grassroots National Men's Network, Men Against Sexual Assault, way back in 1992. And so I've had a long involvement in anti-violence advocacy and a long involvement in scholarly and community work, promoting, guiding, advocating for efforts to engage men and boys in preventing violence against women. Next slide, please. And certainly I've published widely on this area, critical stock takes of the engaging men field, examinations of what insights masculinity scholarship gives us for this work. My book, Engaging Men and Boys in Violence Prevention, which I make available free. I'm about to launch a major report reviewing scholarship on patterns of violence perpetration. Next slide, please. I've also worked more widely on efforts to engage men and boys in building gender equality, commenting on the turn to men in gender politics, the increasing focus on men as feminists and so on, writing on fathering, pornography and other areas, and again, providing a kind of critical assessment of the engaging men field. Next slide, please. And this work is complemented by a kind of another stream of work that maps men's practices, men's attitudes and relations. So the Man Box work that many of you would have heard of, pioneered by Jesuit Social Services, other work with Vic Health on community attitudes to men and masculinity, pieces on men's rights and backlash and so on. And I've just started a new project on men's pathways to involvement in anti-women online movements. Back to Amanda, or is it Shelley?
Shelley.
Hey there, everyone. I've got an extra dramatic voice today. I've been doing way too many trainings. So I know many of you have had the pleasure and the pain of meeting me out there doing this work around 17 years now across Australia, from pirate therapy with young boys to having the honour of working on Nunnathara lands in WA, being guided by Aboriginal elders and professionals to undertake one of the first ever Aboriginally owned and designed sexual health and harm health promotion programs back in the mid-noughties. I am a hybrid of practice and investigation. I specialise in that practice innovation in men's space and violence prevention. So I'm also the model designer and author of the Working Together with Men resource, which has been applied across communities in Australia since 2016. Do you mind changing the next slide for me, Grace? So at the moment, I'm at RMIT and I'm raising the consciousness there. And the latest idea that we've been making real is the gender justice barbershop. So can you just change the slide, Grace? So we've been really trying to come up with fresh ways to engage our identifying men students in how they can connect and have different conversations. So we've had a number of pop-up barbershops where we have had 100 students sit down and have one-on-one interaction with social justice barbers, such as the amazing Matt Brown from Shears Not Your Rehab and Nazir Savani, the Streets Barber. So yeah, I'm all about getting that praxis and really making it real. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shelley. Well, I've worked with Maria for probably about 20 years, and she's done some amazing work in the activist space, but also in the research space. So she's worked on me on various projects. We can see here the absolute plethora of work that she's done in terms of research, but also communities of practice. So she's been able to bring people together in learning spaces to explore this work. She's also written some research reports and articles with me relating to this project, but also previous projects. She was involved in the Our Watch Focus Respectful Relationships in primary schools research. Sorry, Maria, we can't hear you. So I don't know whether I've done you justice, but Maria is fantastic in the practice space. And our last person, Anna Halifoff, wasn't able to come today, but her work is in the area of religious education and spirituality. And she was able to bring a different sort of focus to the research, which was really excellent, I think. So what we'd like to do now is to walk you through a short 10-minute snapshot of the tool. It walks you through the structure and technical aspects rather than a deep dive into each of the items of the tool. After the video, we'll invite you to access the tool, and hopefully you'll be able to have time to scan through the items. We'll give you about 3 to 5 minutes to do this, and then we'll return to respond to any questions that you have. Please do pose questions into the chat if you have any, and Michael will be moderating the chat as you go, and I'll let him answer all the difficult questions. So over to you, Grace, for the video. Okay, so firstly, we have a home page where you can start the survey straight away, or you have an option to learn more about the survey from several tabs. This page tells you all about the tool, and it really covers some of the information that we've just presented to you in our presentation, what the tool is about, who it's for, and how the tool is organised around the 4 checklist areas with a number of items, the focus and the resources. So going back to home, if you'd like to start the survey straight away, you can do so from this tab. But before we do that, it might be nice to have a look at the acknowledgements page. There's our research team there and the design and communications team and our valuable contributors. So we have a contact page, and there's a few ways that you might like to use the contact page. The first one might be about the process of the tool. So if there's any issues in terms of using the tool, and the other one might be about how you're using the tool in your organisation. So any sort of feedback that you'd like to give us would be very welcome. So back to the survey. And as I said, you can start the survey a few ways, from the top tabs or from this button here. So this page introduces the instructions for completing the tool. It should take about 20 minutes, and we recommend that you minimise distractions as much as possible. To complete the assessment tool, you need to answer each question and include a response to each question. And each of the items includes 5 numbers that are a Likert scale in terms of what best fits your response. And this is explained below. There is a question mark icon for some of the items if you need more detailed explanation of some of the questions. At the end, you can click submit, and that will generate a page which articulates your scores for each of the areas in the survey. It's important to know that your data will be not identifiable. So once you've finished, the data won't be recorded, but you'll be able to print out your results. So the first section is aims and focus. The items in this area focus on important elements in your program, such as connecting with boys and men, on including them in the development of activities and building on their strengths and their care for themselves and others. We have explicit items about gender and the importance of challenging rigid gender stereotypes, including how they constrain boys and men. And you'll note the question mark symbols for some of the items that require a little bit more explanation. This section also includes recognition of the importance of a theory of change or a logic model to account for how the program's content and processes are intended to achieve their outcomes, and also how the program seeks to maximise the safety of participants and the people in their lives. So as we mentioned earlier, there are a suite of resources at the end of this tool that will support any of the concepts that are introduced in these items that might seem unfamiliar or that you might need further support with. So the next section is scale and support. And really this is about how your program sits within the broader structures and practices within, say, your organisation. So this next section is focused on teaching and learning. And here we've divided it into 4 key areas: content, processes, structure, and facilitation. In content, we want to highlight the importance of topics being relevant and meaningful to participants and connecting with their lives. Content that explores issues of identity, connection, respect, belonging. Content that supports participants to examine issues of power, conflict, and violence. And content that supports participants to critically reflect on their sense of self, values, beliefs, behaviours, and especially those associated with rigid gender stereotypes and harmful forms of masculinity. We recognise here the importance of trauma-informed practice in terms of being mindful of how trauma might be involved in some of the participants' experiences of masculinities, especially. And we're looking again at intersectionality and building awareness about different forms of inequality. We do have an action focus in this area, like in the aims and focus. So we're focusing on social change, such as advocacy work or work in the community, and issues of personal accountability for how attitudes and behaviours harm others. So the next area is teaching and learning processes. And here we're looking at processes and activities that support a sense of safety, connection, inclusion, respect, and openness. And the final area of teaching and learning is about facilitation. And this is really important in terms of ensuring that facilitators have relevant expertise and skills that are consistent with the aims of the program. So good interpersonal skills and active listening skills, the capacity to facilitate group discussion and to be open to others and to encourage and support conversation. Are facilitators able to engage participants in building solidarity to mobilise positive change? This is a really important one in terms of the power to create positive change through building solidarity among group members to support this change. And again, are facilitators able to engage in ongoing critical reflection about their own experiences and relations to gender and other intersections of identity, power, and privilege, including identifying and questioning their own biases? It's really important for facilitators to be able to engage in self-reflection in this work. So the final section is about evaluation and improvement. And this requires thinking about who you are accountable to and how, and what kinds of evidence you gather to assess how well your program is achieving its aims. So on the final page, you get an overall survey score and you get a score per category. Now, again, as we said in our presentation, the tool isn't meant to be used as a blunt instrument. It's meant to be used as a conversation, as a way to promote ongoing reflection of your program. So it's not supposed to be a summative kind of numerical score of how good or bad your program is. But this does represent the areas of your program that perhaps you might like to look at in terms of strengths and weaknesses. So when you get your results, you'll have a look at the particular areas that perhaps you didn't do so well in, and you see here scale and support is a little bit low. And that might mean that your program doesn't get ongoing funding, or it may mean that your program is not aligned as well with some of the other programs in your organisation. So once you receive your score, the explanation for each of the areas is explained in the table below as exemplary, accomplished, developing, and beginning. There'll be an opportunity for you to access the resource bank for each of the key areas. I'll just demonstrate here. So in aims and focus, you'll see that there's some wonderful access to many resources that will support you in this area. And there's an opportunity to scroll along and check out all of the wonderful resources, all very much practice oriented and helpful for you and publicly available. So this opens up in a new page, and you can move back to the survey results and then click on the different areas to access the different resources. Some of these are double up in each of the areas because they are resources that cover all of the areas. And similarly, if you press on the teaching and learning icon, teaching and learning resources come up, and we have a series of resources that will support your program in terms of teaching and learning. And the last one, evaluation and improvement, there's a selection of resources that will support you in this area as well. So as I said before, the results won't be automatically saved. So if you would like to save your results, you can do so by clicking this button, and that will take you to a page where you can print out your results for later reference. And then there's a mechanism for feedback, and we would really welcome your feedback on the tool. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I know that we haven't given you much time to look at the tool, but hopefully you've got an idea about some of the different items in the 4 different areas. We'd like to open up now for a Q&A. Michael will moderate the questions, but we've got some questions in the Q&A section, but also in the chat. And I think Michael's, there's some there that you'd like to respond to. But I guess the first one here is how useful or applicable the tool is for programs that are not inherently designed as violence prevention or have a gender lens, but is related to broader non-violent objectives, for example, outdoor nature-based education, climate activism. The tool is designed for work with men and boys, so it's specifically designed for that particular group, and it's specifically designed with the idea of addressing issues of, I guess you could say, harmful or unhealthy versions of masculinity. So that's the specific focus. But I think, I think in terms of its applicability beyond that, we think the social justice focus of the program has utility in a broader sense in how programs are designed, say with a social justice focus. So I think there's probably elements in that, particularly, as you say, in outdoor nature-based education, and the way that we've tried to include items around Indigenous sensibilities of valuing beyond the human, so valuing plants, environment, our country. So it's looking at critiquing, I guess, that notion of wealth accumulation and capitalism and individualism and competition. So we've got items in there that sort of have broader applicability in terms of social justice. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Shall I tackle some of the others, Amanda?
Yeah.
So there were three questions very kind of practically. One is, will the papers related to this project be available? And I promised in the chat, Amanda, that we would at least look at whether we could send everybody on this webinar copies of the papers. So let's explore that. People also asked if the slides were available, and again, that would be desirable. Third question, though, was, is the data collected by the tool, do we hang on to it? Do we do something with it? And essentially the answer is no. That when you input the data into the survey, you then can download a PDF of the results of your use of the tool, but it's not collected by the tool itself, as I understand it. And then there's some really interesting questions. So one was Stephen Fisher asking, this is a great resource. Still appears that most programs will adopt an individual awareness raising or attitude improving approach, as these are most easily programmable. How could the tool encourage men to organise to challenge structural gender harms? And so I'll try to respond to that. So the tool is focused on programs. It is focused on discrete programs or initiatives that engage men and boys. So in a sense, it's kind of limited by its nature to that kind of initiative. And we're well aware that other kinds of strategies, policy, community mobilisation, other strategies are very important means of affecting change in structural gender inequalities and engaging men and boys in change. However, the tool itself does have some items that encourage us to kind of think beyond just to kind of face-to-face education, and to think about whole of institution strategies and being oriented to broader material and structural change. So while the tool itself is focused on programs and initiatives, it does ask questions that at least get program implementers and others thinking about the broader question you've raised.
And also, just want to add, sorry, just
sure, go for it.
Add there's social action embedded in the items as well. So it's not just about reflection on the self and on others and on behaviours, but about change, social change. So there's a couple of advocacy, community action items. And as I said, one of the programs that was in the research was an activist program, and they did wonderful work in that space. And Shelley's work is absolutely amazing in that space in terms of supporting men to be allies and supporting men to support social justice initiatives, gender justice initiatives in their communities to make change beyond their immediate world. So hopefully I've given your program justice there, Shelley.
Shelley, this is a question for you. I think from memory, it's from Christopher. Christopher asked about the top recommendation for developing community of practice resource, a resource among facilitators of boys programming. So top recommendation for developing community of practice resource or resources.
Also, the best resource that's out there for developing a community of practice. Is that essentially what that question's asking?
I believe so.
Oh my gosh. Talk about put me on the spot, Michael. Thanks. I think that was poison chalice. Other than my own, but also I think...
Bring your own. Remind us of your own.
Well, thanks. The Working Together with Men resource is... and if we're looking at creating ways that men can engage that are place-based, that are themed by where they are and what they're passionate about, but also where it holds them accountable to women or the groups that experience violence the most, in the Working Together with Men resource, which does have a current PDF, which is what RMIT is now also applying across its VE and HE, and hopefully into Vietnam next year as well, is a roots-based mobilisation model. So by following some key aspects of the model, which is actually quite simple, you can theme it with whatever the need is within the community. And it gathers men to go undertake key knowledge workshops, but then also activate them around key projects. So where they naturally build communities of practice, but hold accountability, because a lot of work with men, unfortunately, creates communities of a practice that aren't accountable to women or those who experience violence the most. And that's the stuff that I'm not about. So we can still create safe spaces for men to explore and learn and gather, but also actually do and be accountable.
Thank you for that. Amanda, this is a question for you, I'd say. So Michael Akolzer asks, noting that the research behind the tool is focused on Victoria, is there an intent to look at what is being done in other areas of Oz?
Yes, so the research that sort of was the impetus for the tool is definitely in Victoria, but our broader research draws on a much wider scope. So my research has been in the UK, the US, and different parts of Australia, different states in Australia. Certainly, we all bring knowledge about this field from broader than Victoria, and we would definitely say that it's applicable beyond Victoria, absolutely, to broader. Sorry,
Amanda, I was going to say, so Kino Senior has broadened that question. Great initiative. Do you plan to expand the project to other countries? So we've been asked about Australia. What about other countries?
I think other English-speaking countries would find it beneficial. But I mean, as we say, it is a conversation starter and a work in progress. So we think we've created a pretty great scaffold that, you know, can support modifications and improvements in relation to context. And what speaks, what has spoken to me in terms of this issue is around the Indigenous program that we included in the project, and really thinking about how some of those issues could be incorporated into the tool. So I do think it's applicable in broader context. I don't know whether Michael, Shelley, or Maria, you have anything to say about that.
Shelley?
Sorry, just the broader context of our work and
its applicability in other contexts.
Oh, the actual tool. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we also were obviously, as most research projects, constrained to starting in Victoria. It is absolutely, that was the driving force behind it, is wherever it, I mean, obviously we don't have it currently translatable, you know, into other languages. That would be the next move. But it can go across any kind of program that's wanting to work with men, even if it's quite a structured program, because of those key elements of reflection. There is part of the thing that was driving us, and one of my sort of, you know, on the picket line of, there is nothing that is collated thinking and the doing for those on the ground, the boots on the ground, to actually use a tool to promote and create reflection within what we do. We're often quite fragmented in the sector, and we're often feeling like who's doing that over there? I heard a program up in Queensland, and it's just so great to be able to use something where we know is informed by the current evidence base as well, because we know there's a lot of noise out there, but not always what we know is actually could maybe make the change. So I would encourage anyone to have a go at it and see where it applies, because we've created this to work within any model.
Shelley, it's a very nice segue to a question from Stephen Fisher. Stephen Fisher asks, could the tool encourage people to publicly criticise dangerous patriarchal organisations such as Moody's, and gives a link to a heading about global credit ratings agencies, Moody's, troubled by the level of deficit and so on. I think I'm trying to figure out there that really it's about the tool, the kind of numerical score it gives, and whether that will be valuable in criticising, aspects of this work. And I think you've kind of hinted at that. I'm not quite sure that it will work like this, but you might imagine that someone running a boys program goes, well, ours got 86 on the tool, and someone goes, oh, well, we got 92 actually. Obviously I'm being playful here, but providing a kind of quantitative measure of the strength of a particular program and its strength in those different dimensions of practice, we do see that as useful for program developers and designers and others assessing programs, really to try to raise the standard. And we mean raising the standard in feminist and social justice terms. Amanda or Shelley, any thoughts on that?
Amanda, can I, part of it was also, in my early years when trying to develop work and programs with men, there was, you have to do so much work to sort of gather, would this be a good idea, or where should I maybe evaluate my own program? I would actually be totally okay with getting a low score in an area, because that means, okay, that's where I can start to drill down. That's where we start to put our energy. Because sometimes doing this work, you feel like you're out there alone, you're a little bit under-resourced, and to be able to know like, oh, wow, okay, we're kind of doing this bit right, but oh, wow, maybe there's a couple of tweaks we can make here that is really going to make the change. Because the whole reason we're in this room, as virtual as it is because we actually want to end violence. And so my work is like, tell me where, I'm struggling, or the challenge is, so we can, really adapt it to end violence. It's not about, ego, or about, I got a 92, because, hopefully, we imagine we should be developing a new tool in, say, 18 months, because everyone's all getting 100, and we need to amp it up. So get out there, man.
We're nearly out of time, Amanda, but there was one more question I was wondering, Amanda, if you could answer. It was two questions and I missed one. So one was about translating the tool into other languages and its use, for example, in India, Chinese or Muslim communities. So translating into other languages and use in particular communities in Australia.
Well, no plans yet, but how awesome would that be? We'd love to do that. And I think there'd be some cultural sensibilities that we could weave into the tool in ways that would be really productive. The tool is meant to be very connected to the particular boys and men that are in the programs. But we would love that. That would be fantastic.
There are other questions coming in, but I think we're virtually at time, so I'll hand back to you, Amanda.
Yeah, and I would just like to...
While you're doing that, Amanda, so Kendra Hubance asked, are there plans for creating an iteration of the tool to support checking in during implementation on how well the program is achieving its goals? Shelley, do you want to take that? And so supporting checking in during implementation.
Yeah, what's great about the tool also, I feel like I've got the sales pitch going on here, is that obviously you can go back to it at any time. So, when you're developing it, you might actually answer differently to as you're implementing it. So although at the moment there's not an explicit area of saying, as you go to different stages, it's still viewed as something that you could use as a return to and actually go back and answer the questions.
So we just wanted to finish by, what's next, where you can find the tool. So Grace, I wonder if you could just provide a bit of information about finding the tool and it's housed on the CRIS website, but maybe you could just mention how to find the tool.
Yeah, sure, very happy to. So you can access the tool directly from the link that I posted in the chat earlier, and I'll post it in the chat again. But for now, if you go to crisconsortium.org, scroll down a little bit to our research, you can find a link there. And it's also hosted under resources, tools and toolkits on the CRIS website. So I will pop a link in the chat now.
Thank you. That's great. Please send it to anyone who you think might be interested. So the other thing is, when you registered, we asked if you would be interested in receiving a briefing paper or being involved in a consultation or workshops next year, and we'll contact you in the new year to organise these. So just briefly, the briefing paper will introduce the evidence that informs the items in the survey. The consultations and workshops will involve unpacking the tool with you as it's relevant and useful for your program and practice. And these sessions will be focused on opening conversations about particular areas and items towards working for social justice with boys and men. And we'd like in the future to set up communities of practice to support sharing and learning in this space around the tool. And as I mentioned, the tool is a work in progress, and we hope that these processes will support a refining of the tool. We're also really keen to engage programs in research around the issues raised in the tool, and would welcome any ideas or support in this area. And just finally, I'd love to thank very much our great design and communications team. So Grace Holland and Lara and Troy from Paper Pixel, and of course our valued contributors. So Tanya Faha, Cameron McDonald, Michael Hale and Rachel Thompson, and Ben McVeigh and Jalen Thorpe all commented and provided excellent feedback on an early version of the tool. And thank you again for coming to the webinar, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks, team, as well.